don't escape yet, Ian. You've got to come back up here. If you can grab a seat here, Ian. Certainly thank you, Ian, for your presentation. I particularly liked the discussion around the centre, or people wanting their centre to be the centre of town, and also the reference there to the synergy or the tapestry of the development uses, and I'm sure that'll come up in the discussion that follows here. So I've got some questions to hand. I've been scribbling some notes, and hopefully you've been doing the same. So I'll open it up and let people ask some questions as they wish, and we'll go from there. And as is the custom with these events, no one asks a question. Go on, be the first. Great.
Yeah, Ian, Ben from Coles. Just interested in Vancouver, in the transit cities, and the way that the train stations, etc., are located within those cities. I guess at the town centres I've seen, or the future planned town centres in Victoria, most of the train stations are on the fringe of the cities. Is that sort of common in Vancouver, or the successful ones in the heart of the city? Or?
Well, I think initially they could be on the periphery, but again, because of the desirability and the livability, they go from a classic suburban greenfields to high density, in a 10-year period. And the other interesting thing, and you have that competition you would have in the US, Whole Foods. And Whole Foods, who can be seen to do no wrong, and they're more upscale, more organic food store, but they've thrown out the old tried and proven principles of what a supermarket required, in a specific location. So often a Whole Foods will be smack, right in the middle of these projects, and that whole notion that their parking has to be unencumbered. If they've got serious body heat, it's like New York. They'll have very little parking because everybody will be walking, to the store. And again, consumers are very discriminating, very savvy. So, a name like Coles, if it's in the Melbourne context, if you can change your mindset and become part of this, it becomes a win-win. And I know it's a quantum leap for you to say, but where's the parking? We're just amazed how far people will walk, and quite happy to do it.
Great, thanks, Ian. Anyone else?
I'm interested in the offshore examples of, obviously we're talking about centres being generated by virtue of transport hubs, TODs, etc. In the offshore examples, what is the funding model for the actual transport itself? Here in Melbourne we tend to struggle with the funding of such transport. I mean, obviously a very positive, environmentally friendly exercise. I'd be interested to understand what the funding model is. Is it the developers that are contributing to part of these projects, the transport in itself?
Well, for example, in the case of Toronto, where that Scarborough example, and they were creating a spur line, the city was substantially increasing the density. And in some cases, the city owned the land. So when they were selling it to a developer, they were making a fortune. So that helped fund the cost of building the line, because it's a public cost, it's not a private cost. And so, that's just one creative way of how a public body was able to have their cake and eat it too.
I mean, the interesting example in Melbourne is obviously the Melbourne Rail Link, but that's a project where I think the state probably knows that really the best way to fund. They're probably missing $3 billion effectively to fund that project, and the Commonwealth said we want another $3 billion funded out of state taxes, but the politics of placing land charges on landowners, existing landowners in the CBD in a Melbourne context is a major constraint at the moment.
I've got a couple here, so I'm going to fire away here. I've got I might go with you, Richard. I've got post-Melbourne 2030 and Plan Melbourne. What further policy or planning regulation changes can you see may occur?
Well, I think there's going to be increased pressure in our activity centres, our local activity centres, and, you know, because this is not just about the major town centres and the new town centres, we want mixed use to work everywhere. So, look, an example near me, you know, Mentone and Cheltenham, they've got Southland Shopping Centre on their doorstep. Look, without picking on a council, but you've got Kingston Council down there who's, you know, wants to maintain 2- and 3-storey height limits in Mentone Activity Centre, which is a major activity centre. Coles, I think, has got a store there that probably could do with some renewal. You know, one of the ways in which, whether it's a Coles or a Woolworths or any of those stores in your traditional suburban shopping centres can renew is either in their own right or through redevelopment achieving some residential densification. But, you know, with that type of height limit in place, and, you know, the other thing, of course, the council complains about is all our local shops are vacant, you know, the residential demand has moved to the large competing retail centre. So the penny doesn't seem to have dropped yet about, you know, linking in some fairly obvious, you know, mixed-use development with apartment development and getting the restaurants and cafes moving, combined with allowing those existing retailers to obviously become more feasible.
And we've certainly seen some of that along the tram lines, and you covered that earlier, and I thought that was a really good point.
Yep.
I've got another one probably for yourself, Ian, in this case. You talked about the 6 Ds, and you talked also about the desire to create that centre of town. So in terms of the vision that developers might look for or try and formulate, what are the key ingredients, do you feel, to comprise that vision, aside from, say, the 6 Ds? And in particular, maybe you mentioned the word place, and we hear quite a bit about creating a place. In your view, what makes somewhere a place?
Dave, that's a very good question, and the quick answer is it's probably better than the answer you're going to get. Firstly, I think you know, what we're talking about is the totality of the mixed use, and if you get it right, you have created a great place, and then it will just build and build. But we've got to be honest with ourselves. The retail industry is highly governed. We are, even in the shopping centre industry, it's not good enough to say you're just building shopping. It's what segment are you in? And similarly, you know, not everybody can do an office tower, can do a hotel. There are specialists in all of that. And so I cited that example in Birmingham, where the 4 of the biggest developers in the UK all got together. They had expertise in a lot of things, but some had it more than others. So they carved out within that massive bullring development what they were going to do. And we're seeing this happening all the time. As an aside, we've been asked to work on Mall of the World, you know, which is going to be the biggest mall in the world in Dubai, 20 million square feet. But it's going to be a mixed-use development. And what they see, it's a bit like Melbourne Docklands here, breaking it into, in this case, 8 precincts, and then putting it out to public tender, and then making sure that they go to plan and that there's connectivity from one precinct to another. And so it's not 8 distinct places all vying for attention and competing against one another, but rather it's the totality of it, and you seamlessly will move from one precinct to another. And I think that's how, you know, you're getting the place element. And so I think, you know, in Melbourne, I could easily see a residential developer going with an office developer, going with a retail developer, going with a hotel developer, and you've got it all in concert with a plan that's basically what the public authorities are calling out for, and it all gets developed at once. This is my point about, you know, we tend to think sequentially. Oh, well, we'll start with the residential, and if that works, then we may build the residential. And once we've got the residential, then we'll build the retail. And once we've got that, we may build the hotel. But if you come up with a plan that's exciting enough that everyone can see the simple mechanics of it all, no one wants to be left out. And that's how you can have literally instant places being created, within a 5-year period, which was never, dreamt of before.
Did you want to have a crack at that as well, Richard?
Yeah, well, I think there's clues in, what makes a good place in the suburbs that everybody are moving to. So, whether it's Richmond or St Kilda or, a lot of our inner suburbs, people are moving back there because they want access to employment, they want access to local services, and they want a diversity of services nearby. So, looking at the components of those suburbs that have reinvented themselves is a bit of a clue to what's successful.
Yeah, and I guess we've sort of seen that with Eastland at Ringwood, with a place effectively being created there. So, okay, that's great. Any other questions from the floor? Yep, we've got one here.
Yeah, just in relation to talking about density and so that working in particular town centre scenarios, I guess taking some of the lessons out of Europe and you look at some of the way their cities are built with medium density throughout the city, and that creates a good balance with public transport. And we've also heard Richard talk about issues down to Mentone not getting enough height. The example of Portland you gave, talking about that medium sort of density, that seems to be potentially a more sustainable type of solution for good chunks of Melbourne in terms of going forward. What were some of the lessons learned from Portland that could potentially be applied to Melbourne?
I don't know if everyone heard the question, but they were. It's really pertaining to Portland as a potential precedent model example for Melbourne. It was one of the first to get into the light rail system. Portland always tends to march to its own drumbeat. It was breaking new ground at the time. It all came about around the turn of the century, and there was a group called the Congress of New Urbanism, where they saw the efficiencies of mixed use and town centre development. But Portland realised they had to walk before they run, and so they opted for the medium density scheme, and that was what Richard was showing in a lot of what you're doing in Melbourne. I just think, though, I've seen it happen so many times when you build iconic towers in suburban, 30, 40 miles from, or kilometres from the city, how it just changes everyone's perception. And if it's iconic and it gets that vitality, that energy, that body heat, that people are, attracted to it like bees to honey. And so, yes, I think Melbourne, there's that awful expression, avoid disappointment, aim low. If they wanted to, aim more low, of course, Portland would be a great example. But I think what we're finding all over the world, that, going for the brass ring, going more for that high density development, true places then are really going to emerge. And my point is that there are so many precedents for this, and there's rules of thumb that have started to emerge, how you make these projects work, that I think because of the dynamism of Melbourne, yes, by all means, do a Portland, but I think you may want to opt for one or two iconic projects.
Oh, folks, well, let's. I want to thank Richard and Ian. Fantastic question and answer session. But before you escape,